Hello, my name is Andre Vasile, and with the help of my mentor, Dr. Travenka, I was able to do my honors thesis on problematic cannabis use in student athletes and non-athletes, associations with mental health. So let's get started. So just a little introduction and background. Young adult cannabis use has increased. It's increased yearly, monthly, and daily. The reason why daily is bolded is because on the right, the figure represents this. We see time in years on the x-axis, and on the y-axis we see percent of daily usage. And if we look at that blue line, that age range is young adults, so we see an increasing trend there. Also, about 26% of athletes report cannabis use spanning from adolescent to professional levels, so we understand that cannabis is very prevalent in athletes. Cannabis use may be important to examine in young adult athletes because they use more than older athletes. Athletes use cannabis less than non-athletes, but it's unclear if they experience more, the same, or fewer related problems. And early, frequent, and high-dose cannabis use is linked to depression and anxiety. And college athletes have increasing mental health and substance use concerns, and this is very interesting, and we want to investigate this. So now moving on to my aims and hypotheses. The first aim of the study was to determine whether college athletes will report more cannabis use related problems compared with non-athletes. And then I hypothesized that athletes will report more problems related to cannabis use. So now moving on to my second aim and second hypotheses. The second aim of the study was to determine whether college athletes who report problems from cannabis use also experience greater mental health issues like depression and anxiety compared to athletes who don't endorse problematic cannabis use and non-athletes who do and don't endorse problematic cannabis use. And then I hypothesized an interaction such that student athletes who endorse recent problematic cannabis use would report significantly higher levels of self-reported depression and anxiety compared to student athletes with no problematic cannabis use and non-athletes both with and without problematic cannabis use. Now moving on to the methods. In terms of participants, we had a total of 514 college students, 183 were student athletes, and 331 were non-athletes. In terms of measures, they completed 3 mental health questionnaires, one for depression, which we call the PHQ-9, one for anxiety, which we call the G87, and then one for substance use problems, which we call the CAGE-AID. It's very important to note that after the CAGE-AID, participants were asked an optional follow-up question. The question stated in the last 3 months, which drugs or substances listed below cause concerns or problems in your life. They can check all that apply from a list of substances. For the aims of this study, we specifically examined whether cannabis or flower was checked. And then recruitment sources, athletes were recruited through the Pac-12 Mental Health Project, and then non-athletes through the Oregon State University Psychology SONA system. So now moving on to cannabis results. In the top right, we see that cannabis-related problems are more common in non-athletes. In the figure on the bottom right, we can see depression levels by athlete status and cannabis-related problems, but this also mirrors anxiety. So athletes had lower PHQ-9 depression and GD7 anxiety scores than non-athletes. And then individuals with cannabis-related problems had higher depression and anxiety scores than individuals without cannabis-related problems. And there was no interaction found between group and cannabis problems. It's also important to note that me and Dr. Travenka did an exploratory alcohol analysis. So moving on to the exploratory alcohol results, in the top right, we see that alcohol-related problems are more common in athletes. In the figure on the bottom right, we see depression levels by athlete status and alcohol-related problems. But again, this mirrors anxiety. So individuals with alcohol-related problems had lower depression and anxiety scores than individuals without alcohol-related problems. And there was no interaction found between group and alcohol problems. So now the question is asked, what future directions should we take? We should conduct longitudinal studies on substance use trends in student athletes and non-athletes. We should collect detailed metrics such as frequency, quantity, potency, and motivation for use. We should also develop prevention programs tailored to athlete populations. And we should continue exploring how cannabis and alcohol uniquely impact mental health.